I think most gamers, when generally speaking, can agree that 2023 has been a fantastic year for gaming so far. And when you look at a company like Nintendo and realize that at this point they've put out 3 different games that have all scored above the 90 tier in Metacritic ratings, which by the way is extremely rare and hard to do. It's not an easy feat, and those are all first-party published Nintendo titles. It's something to sit back and think about, because how are they having the success that leads them to certain scores like this? We've seen some big 90+ wins that aren't exclusive to Nintendo, such as Baldur's Gate 3 being in the high 90s, tying with Tears of the Kingdom, and most recently, Spider-Man 2 on the PlayStation 5 breaking into that 90 tier. The one thing that you do tend to see in the industry nowadays around different companies is crunch and rush when it comes to pushing games out the door, and sometimes that does factor into review scores for various different games in a big way. If your first memory of a game is booting it up and having a buggy mess on your hands and having potentially some game-breaking bugs, you might not be that interested in continuing onward with the game. You can always patch things later on, but that initial experience when you boot something up is really what you'll walk away remembering more than anything else, unless if you're somebody who waits a year to maybe play a game for the first time, and you may indeed already be playing the best version of the game at that point in time. But the idea is to release a finished product. That should be a somewhat simple conclusion, but it's something that really doesn't happen as frequently as it needs to in the modern day. And there was recently an interview with Doug Bowser that I do believe reiterates how Nintendo does business with their first-party published games, and really why we see the success that they have in terms of some of these review scores, not to mention just obviously some fantastic creative minds over at Nintendo HQ amongst all their different development teams that are creating these experiences to begin with. But work environment and having time to actually finish a project definitely plays into this factor. And before we dive through that exact interview quote and talk about what Nintendo has really done across the board here so far in 2023, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your bell notification if you're new here. And I want to quickly hop over to Go Nintendo, where you can see the following article that I believe directly correlates to some of these high-scored games that we've seen this year, and a broad conversation on what this could really mean for Nintendo's future, even when we talk about things like next-gen hardware, and specifically the launch lineup that we can maybe expect to kick that thing into full gear sooner rather than later. Doug Bowser says Nintendo devs aren't pressured to maintain deadlines. Quality is the focus, top of their game. The exact quote reads, "One thing with Nintendo development is we don't pressure our teams to deliver within a certain window. If they need more time, they'll take more time. And the reason for that is our players have an expectation of the quality that our games will bring. We want to make sure we respect and deliver those wow moments." Now, there are actually some prime examples that tie into 2 out of the 3 scores that we'll be discussing as far as what Nintendo's pulled off this year. One of them directly relates to Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, as you might remember that Zelda Tears of the Kingdom was not supposed to be a 2023 game. It was actually marketed to us in a trailer that the game would launch within 2022, and we of course all woke up one morning and saw Mr. Aonuma on screen explaining that they needed more time to finish the game and deliver something to our expectations, and we saw them essentially push back the launch close to a year on this thing, as there are developer interviews explaining that Nintendo actually did a full additional year all in polish. The game was essentially done, but they knew with a massive open world like what Tears of the Kingdom offers you, that there would be a lot of game-breaking bugs, glitches, and things that could go totally sideways with the different physics mechanics that they came up with and all of the unique creativity ideas. They literally took an entire year, pushed back one of their blockbuster Zelda titles to ensure it was a finished product when it was in our hands. And with that, we of course now know that The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom sits at a 96 on Metacritic, which is an extremely high score. Very few games in history have ever broken into this high of a score. And yes, Metacritic is not the end-all be-all of what decides if a game is really great or not, but it definitely gets a good read amongst the gaming community on how they're viewing any particular game, and it's made up of critic reviews that they are paid to do this stuff. So a lot of times, unless if it's the style of game that you're just not into, when you have a ridiculously high Metacritic, it often does, at least in my case, tend to live up to the hype and praise. And you then have a game that I'm simply just loving absolutely every minute of gameplay. It's the most recent first-party Nintendo Switch release. Super Mario Bros. Wonder absolutely lives up to the hype in my opinion. It deserves the 93 score or higher that it's rated on Metacritic, and it's probably the most fun I've had in a 2D Mario game since Super Mario World. and slash Super Mario Bros. 3, both iconic classic 2D Mario platformers for me. This, I would have to say, outside of just the nostalgia memories of being a kid playing through those games, really does rank above it in terms of the actual experience that it delivers so far, and I'm taking my time with it, trying to 100% my first run through. So I've only seen maybe half the stages, if not less, of what it has to offer so far, and I'm entirely sold. This was yet another project that Nintendo in their interviews talked about not giving the developers any kind of launch timeline for. They literally said, go do something new with 2D Mario. They brought in young, more creative minds and mixed up the typical talent pool that they normally throw at these type of projects, and they said, what can you deliver? I'm sure they had some level of a set budget, but in terms of the time constraints, it was pretty much whatever you imagine is what you could expect to see in the final product, and that's why we see some of the crazy, incredible gameplay ideas that have come to fruition, and really the Wonder Seed mechanic in each level is masterfully done, and I really can't stress this enough, unless you just absolutely don't like 2D side-scrolling platforming games, you need to have this in your Nintendo Switch collection. It is definitely a strong must-buy recommendation from me to you in your Switch collection in 2023. Then we have to look at the last 90 plus Metacritic rated game in 2023 from Nintendo that continues to fuel their success, which is none other than Metroid Prime Remastered. And you could stop me right there and say, hang on, Metroid Prime Remastered technically is a GameCube game that of course got its remaster on the Switch, and hence it's not an entirely new title, but I would still argue that the point stands that the reason that this game scored so high with the 94 that it did deliver is due to the level of polish and quality of life improvements that were added to this timeless classic, which was already great at its core, but they obviously gave Retro Studios all the time they needed to totally rework the lighting engine, rework all of the effects, really show up with the best of all worlds on control options. You love to see that because they could have easily just kept it like the classic GameCube style controls or just dual analogs, but not only that, they also decided to program in the option for motion-based controls if you're somebody that maybe experienced this the first time on Metroid Prime Trilogy on the Wii. They gave the fans the options to play it how they want to play it, and it's just a game that aged fantastic. Not to mention the fact that the GameCube was so ahead of its time visually that when it was given that fresh coat of paint, it really is, I would argue, one of the best looking games on the Nintendo Switch period, and we didn't see it launch with a bunch of bugs and glitches like you see happen so often. And let me be clear, Nintendo's not guilt-free from releasing a buggy mess game, but it definitely happens way less often than I think most other publishers, and the Pokemon company specifically has some issues, Game Freak and all of that. I mean, we won't even dive into Scarlet and Violet because that's definitely a big can of worms to open in terms of something that's exclusive to Nintendo platforms just not ever getting the fix that it needed. Scarlet and Violet, while they're excellent games, they still run really rough. I mean, there's no denying that. So I'm not saying Nintendo is perfect here by any stretch of the imagination. They definitely have their flaws, but I do think we are witnessing a historical year within the Nintendo Switch game library, and I think that they can absolutely bring this momentum forward into the next generation console that no doubt, while there are games that will be lined up for the launch window of the Switch 2 or whatever it will be called, it seems to me that Nintendo is committed to giving their developers time to create a finished, as close to perfect product as they can at retail launch, and I personally love to see that, and it's just a great year to be a gamer. So I thought this would be a fun topic to kind of visit with everybody. Let me know how your gaming experience in 2023 is going so far. It is at an all-time high for me when I stop and think about the incredible games I've played through so far this year, and we don't even have Super Mario RPG yet to look forward to in November. That'll be here, not to mention Booster Course Pass Wave 6 for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, so a lot of good stuff to play yet to close out the year. But let me know in the comments down below which games you're enjoying the most right now. Have you picked up Spider-Man 2 and you're enjoying that in addition to maybe a game like Mario Bros. Wonder? That's one that's on my purchase list, but I'm waiting to get through some of the games I'm trying to play through right now before I start it up, because Sonic Superstars was a big one for me also. But let me know what you're playing and enjoying the most right now, and let me know if you're a big fan of this mindset and conversation around Nintendo really allowing their devs just to have an open runway when it comes to development time, and if you think this is a practice that should be more widely adopted within the gaming industry, and your take on whether or not we'll ever see that happen. But regardless of your thoughts and feelings on everything we talked about today, I do look forward to hearing from you all in the comments down below before you leave the video, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around these topics. Go watch yesterday's video next if you haven't already, which is on screen right now. Also make sure you like, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.